join. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
In my mind, we're in the room.
We are.
So I'm seeing 3 people have joined so far, right?
No, I've got about,
Oh, you've got more. That's good.
I see quite a few.
I can only see 3. I think it'd be good if they kept their cameras on so that Adam can feel like he's talking to somebody.
I'm going to leave that up to them.
It might actually slow down the bandwidth if they do that. I think when we take questions, we can do the video on.
I did a class this morning, Design 2. We had 61 people on video.
Wow.
Wow.
So there was really no problem.
That's impressive.
I think it's because, you know, it's postage stamp video. I mean, the bandwidth for one of these like 1" by 1" screens is very tiny.
Hey, Michaela. Hey, Sydney.
Hi.
Julia, good to see you guys, or see that you guys are here.
Thanks for coming.
Okay.
Adam, not to say that I'm glad your talk got postponed by a pandemic, but I was in Mexico when the original date was, so kind of glad.
Oh. Well, I'm glad you can make it now. That's exciting.
Hi, Kelsey.
Definitely a little nervous, but it'll be fine.
Hey, lunch forum. Adam Miller.
That's my
Whoa.
reminder.
That's
It just
cool.
reminded me that you're doing it.
Yeah, you didn't even need that reminder.
No, that's how it is. Once you write it down, you don't need the reminder.
If anyone would like to crinkle their potato chip bags loudly, just feel like we're really here.
Yes. How about chewing sounds and?
I'll provide those. I'm actively eating lunch right now.
No, it's going to do it again. Stop. All right.
Pepper in the chicken.
Because I put salt and pepper on it.
All right. So, Leora, do we have a number of people with us?
I would say so. We've got about 25 people. We want to get started.
Okay. So I'm just going to do the intro. Am I on? Okay. So Adam, welcome. When did you first arrived here last fall, right?
That's right.
That's right. Okay. Well, I haven't had the good fortune of reviewing with you or spending much time, but looking at your resume here, which I'm going to, as usual, read out a little bit to introduce you. So Adam Miller is the 2019 Race and Gender in the Built Environment Fellow at UT's Austin School of Architecture. His research investigates the relationship between aesthetics, power, and identity via the lens of queer body and queer architecture. His interests lie in renegotiating the legacies of modern architecture and its taste culture. He is currently teaching 2 graduate and upper-level undergraduate courses here at UT. He has taught at UC Berkeley. He's the founding member of New Stars, spelled P-N-E-U, Stars, a collaborative design group which produces stage designs and installations. As part of his research, Adam co-edited a 340-page volume of original essays, interviews, and visual work for UC Berkeley's architecture journal called Room 1000, interrogating the subject of the timeless in architecture. Corollary to the volume, he organized a lecture series at UC Berkeley on queer architecture and color, and a graduate reading group session on queer studies in architecture. He asks, how does architectural style confer aesthetic value? How can we come to recognize and reappropriate its tools for alternative ways of seeing, making, and identifying people and buildings? So Adam, what a wonderful subject. I'm looking forward to this myself, the whole group. And thanks for being a pioneer of center forums online. I do look forward to it going back to the usual way, but hey, this is great. Thank you, Adam. Welcome, and yay.
Thanks. Thank you, Michael,
Right.
for that really thoughtful introduction. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to Leora Vysotsky, who is Managing Director for Events at CAD, and also to Michael Benedict as well, who organizes these events. And I'd also like to say thanks to Haley Algo, who has been working with Leora to help do promotional material for these events. And so thank you all. And also thanks to everyone who is Zooming with us right now. So it'll be interesting. I think this format is actually nice because as some people pointed out, it's actually more accessible, ironically, online. So with that, I'll just get started. So this talk is called Not Beautiful, subtitle Querying Monumentality. And it's going to kind of move through several different sections. First, I'll sort of start with some of my conceptual framing. And then I'll go through some of the work I've done pedagogically and my own personal design work, which I've done in collaboration with others. Just to start here, I'll just get going. So modernity has left us with a lot of baggage that as designers, we drag along with us. And as a move to grapple with the politics of this aesthetic baggage, my work and research interests attempt to locate ways to recuperate and work upon modernity's gleaming surface. If the aesthetic goal of modern architecture is the production and preservation of beauty, and its dogma is that that beauty is predominantly a masculine one, then perhaps we should locate alternate aesthetic expressions which better suit our post-gender world. So through pursuing minor aesthetic terms, such as cute, whimsical, awkward, dumpy, and more, my research attempts to try to locate what you might call like non-normative logics of taste. For the beautiful, we have its affect, which tends to be pleasure. So we know the beautiful in how it produces pleasure for us. And that's something that I'm not going to put forward. Oh, I'm getting a pop-up here. Sorry about that. And for the ugly, it produces for us this binaristic affect, which is disgust. So my interests are attempting to pursue the field in between these terms, these binaristic terms, which I believe are othering and produce hardline distinctions, which make it difficult to look at the complexities and contradictions of the vernacular world around us. And so in terms of looking at sort of non-normative logics, one of the definitions of queer that I tend to return to is from queer scholar Jack Halberstam, and this is drawing from In a Queer Time and Space. Queer for Jack and for me refers to non-normative logics and organization of community, sexual identity, embodiment, and activity in space and time. So what this might mean for aesthetics and for architecture and those in design fields, we are in part responsible for defining what beautiful is, what ugly is, and how those terms literally affect the production of space and also the preservation of space or the demolition of space. And so I think it would be important for us to notice that vernacular aesthetic discourses, or what I'm calling minor aesthetic categories or queer aesthetic categories, might better describe the complex built environment around us. And they might allow us to see different, more nuanced and complex frameworks for reading that world around us and designing for that world to produce a world that accommodates a plurality of tastes, peoples, and places. And I'm interested in seeing how a pursuit of minor aesthetic categories such as cute, awkward, dumpy, etc., might help us better understand the complex built environment. So this is an attempt to look into that in-between field between beautiful and ugly. And so in terms of what these categories might mean, or what aesthetic categories mean in general, I'll first start with just a peek at the film Paris is Burning from 1991, which was a documentary on the ballroom culture in New York City, in which this issue of aesthetic categories was performative and directly representational. So they're performing different categories. So this category is school. So they're attempting to perform the looks and movements of school. This one is town and country. It's showing how these issues of representation can literally change how you read a person or their own aspirations. So aesthetic categories. We saw some of them that those in the ballroom culture were dealing with. And all of these categories have implications in space, in architecture and design. And they come from vernacular discourses potentially. Whereas beautiful and ugly are more rarefied in terms of our understanding of the kinds of affects that they produce for us and the ways in which our own discourse frames what those things look like. Minor aesthetic categories are not rarefied in meaning and are actually open to debate. So when faced with describing the vernacular built world around us, terms such as beautiful and ugly, embedded in the deep logic of common sense and good taste, perhaps fail to adequately describe the complexity of the built world around us. And because minor aesthetic categories arise from vernacular and are developed from vernacular discourse, they do remain open to debate for us. So we can continue to rethink their meaning and value. And they show a potential way forward for a solidarity of tastes and a plurality of aesthetics. For scholar Cyan Nye, aesthetic categories are a part of the daily texture of social life. They are once central to our vocabulary for sharing and confirming our aesthetic experiences with others, and that they potentially can become a useful tool for the political evaluation of large-scale cultural phenomena. I'm just going to show you a series of categories that I've been interested in and just go through them really quickly. Cute. So a cute bus stop hotel realness. Whimsical. Whimsical duplex radio station realness. Zany. Zany truck stop church realness. Awkward. Awkward museum police station realness. Strange. Strange parking lot farmer's market. Crude. Crude tea set factory psychic realness. Interesting. Interesting funeral home donut shop realness. So all of these categories are just, I'm showing how they might better describe real complex conditions in the built world around us, where there's contradictory program, there's contradictory styles, discordant elements coming together, which actually it would be hard to describe these things as either beautiful or ugly, and they don't really describe those potential spatial affects that these things can have the potential to provide. So these are also showing us either speculative scenarios of things coming together in complex programs, or they are already existing in the world. So in terms of like our understanding of beauty and where it comes from a long lineage of architectural thinking, I'm showing here one of the Vitruvian men. This one is from Cesar Cesarino. And this image in particular has been discussed by Diana Agreste. And to quote her, this image deals with showing us how logocentrism and anthropomorphism, in particular male anthropomorphism, have underlain the system of architecture since Vitruvius, read and rewritten in the Renaissance through the modern movement. So these concepts of what beautiful mean are gendered, and they are established through architectural history in a somewhat rarefied manner. And Diana Agreste goes on to say that this system is defined not only by what it includes, but also by what it excludes. But that what is excluded or left out is not really excluded, but rather repressed. And so a lot of my interest in aesthetics is about turning towards reevaluating what might be repressed, and some of that, I think, is a repression of sort of vernacular aesthetic discourses or minor aesthetic discourses, at least within architecture. And so some of my work is about trying to rethink what it might mean in our culture, in our aesthetic culture, in architecture, to reevaluate what a decentering of the value of beauty from our discourse might be, but also a decentering of ugliness even. And so this is a rhetorical image. I'm not saying that this is how things should be. I don't actually think that there is any center right now in reality. I think it's entirely decentered. But this is a rhetorical image to show what an alternate aesthetic paradigm what that might mean for us if cute, for example, was the paradigmatic aesthetic discourse here. So what is cuteness? Cuteness often inspires the affective response of the feeling of a desire to protect, but it can also come close to the uncanny, to, in Japanese, kawaii, which is scary. And in Japanese, kawaii is cute, and then kawaii is scary. So these things are actually brought very close to one another, and in Japanese culture, kawaii is actually a big part of aesthetic paradigm. So cuteness is fundamentally about power relations. It's about relationality. So this is just a rhetorical image to think about how reframing what we value in aesthetic discourse might allow us to learn about the built environment around us. So when we're talking about aesthetics and beautiful and ugly, all these things are value judgments that kind of go back to an understanding of what good taste might be. And good taste is actually directly related to this idea of common sense. Common sense is, according to Svetlana Bohm, drawing from Kant's sensus communis, common sense is what allows a human being to perceive through reflexive aesthetic judgment the universal purposefulness of nature. And that this common sense is actually going back further to this idea of commonplaces. So essentially universal truths. Ancient good taste, that this idea of common sense was studied literally by those in upper class society, those who were framing aesthetic discourses. Until the 19th century, people studied idioms, platitudes, universal sayings as the basis of common good taste. However, we live in a world where it's hard to say that there might be such universal platitudes or truths to apply to the world around us. And so as sympathy is being a step towards the perception of the beautiful, yet this perception and the experience of human commonality become more and more indistinct, and the shapes of the beautiful more blurred. So as the shape of the beautiful has become more blurred, I believe that common sense has lost its depth, whereas perhaps a turn towards uncommon senses, minor aesthetic categories, in solidarity might help bring us some clarity. Of course, all of this is to say that we're talking about taste. And I think taste is something that is not always directly addressed in architecture, but it's always there in the background. And architecture as a taste culture delimits the field of what gets to count as architecture and what does not. And through the overturning of styles and its corresponding tastes, the beautiful, along with its foil, the ugly, tend to be the polarizing yardsticks for distinction for us. And as paradigms that drive not only the production of architecture, but also its preservation or erasure, these terms determine the built environment. So taste literally shapes the built environment. So what does taste mean? Or there's been a lot of different ideas about this, but for John Waters tells us that one must remember that there is such a thing as good bad taste and bad taste, and that taste is style. And to know bad taste, of course, you have to have been taught the rules of the tyranny of good taste so that you can yearn to break them. Also, that taste is how you describe yourself. It's how you present yourself to the world. It's about humor, and that everyone is a curator of their own life, what they have around them, what they read, what they watch. And everyone has tastes. It's how you define yourself against the world. For sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, tastes are the practical affirmation of an inevitable difference. In matters of taste, more than anywhere else, all determination is negation. And tastes are perhaps first and foremost distastes, disgust provoked by horror or visceral intolerance of the tastes of others. And so this issue of taste forms groups of people around common tastes. It delimits the possibility of certain sympathies with groups with differing tastes cultures, taste is always a regulating principle in the work of architecture. And so I'm interested in what uncommon senses might do for us, but also to reflect on what the common senses have been constructed as. So part of this work and turning towards like different aesthetic categories, one of which was this concept of the timeless. And a couple of years ago, with Alex Spazier and Sue Han, we put together this editorial project of calling various architects, designers, writers to attempt to deconstruct or better understand what the timeless means as a vernacular term in architecture that also makes its own appearance in the institution as well. So it's actually a term that exists commonly in both the institution of architecture and those perhaps outside the institution of architecture. And so we produced this 345-page volume with various different opinions purporting what timeless is and framing it in different ways. We had contributors such as Nathaniel Furman, Nayron Turan, Andrew Holder, John Stodden, Andrew Kovacs, Al Miller, Bear Valet, Philip Teschman, Whitney Moon, Common Counts, and more. Also put together a design competition, design build competition. This is the result of that design build competition, an attempt to build a timeless pavilion. You can see it here, it's made of bubbles. We also unearthed some old conversations between two of the biggest heads in architecture theory, Peter Eisman and Christopher Alexander, where they fundamentally disagreed on some of these aesthetic issues around timeless. Various different proposals and a survey put out to the school, students, graduate students, and faculty at UC Berkeley to get their opinion on what the timeless looks like, acts like, feels like, what it might mean. And going back a little bit further to my time in graduate school, my architecture thesis was also attempting to grapple with some of these ideas around taste and what might be bad taste. People have told me I have an interest in bad taste, and I think I would agree. I have an interest in understanding why it is considered bad taste. I have an interest in the démodé. So for Susan Sontag, the démodé is old-fashioned, it's out of date, it's all the things which, from a serious point of view, are either bad art or kitsch. And this is also her definition of camp. So I'm interested in the regulating principles of taste and the ways in which we decide things are démodé or out of, or no longer valuable, and how something that was so easily considered to be good taste can very quickly become bad taste. And so my project was looking at a reappraisal of the so-called single surface project from the early aughts. This project was done about 10 years after the single surface project had basically died off. So it was close enough for it to still almost be alive, but it was in all terms considered to be bad taste to design things in single surface project. So my work was attempting to redeploy the aspirations of the single surface project, try to understand what those aspirations were, which I believe was an attempt to give the appearance of a continuous whole of disparate parts. So the project was working on an impossible building which twisted, turned, and flipped around across various sites at various different scales, but attempted to maintain the appearance of a continuous whole across those sites. So it actually moves across the entire planet and even onto Mars. And so you can see here through the tools of architectural representation, we can start to show how the single surface project only really achieves some of its work through representation. Another issue which has to deal with issues of representation and is this concept of realness that I'm interested in, which also is sort of coming out of that ballroom culture of Paris's Burning is depicting. And for Dorian Corey, who is the individual who's speaking on that video that I showed earlier, who's a drag queen, realness is the ability to blend. That's what realness is. If you can pass the untrained eye or even the trained eye and not give away the fact you are gay, or for me in the architectural context, not give away the fact that a building is trying to be some other thing, like might be a furniture, or a furniture might be a building. When these things are trying to be other things, that's when it's realistic. The idea of realness is to look as much as possible like your straight counterpart. It is not a takeoff, it is not a satire, it's actually being able to do this. And that's the kind of work that was being done in the ballroom culture. So realness as an architectural issue of representation might shows us how the power of appearances is actually quite meaningful in design thinking, and that rethinking the vernacular across different scales might be a place to generate new ideas about architecture, or generate new places to rethink architecture. And so I'm going to show you some of my teaching here at UT Austin, some of the earlier student work, in part because I believe that teaching is a form of research, and also because I think the student work, I'm glad the students work so hard on this stuff, and I'm proud of them. So this is a project by Julia, so starting from a found object, this is a design studio. Students attempt to pull out a found aesthetic position with which to design furniture and to design a building as well. So to show that these ideas of personal taste translate across scale and provide sort of an analogical way of thinking about design that takes seriously cultural meanings, associations, and material. So this project is an attempt to deal with the individual tastes of students and allowing them to provide a voice and critical analytical framework to reading those objects which they chose, and they chose them because they had a strong feeling about them. So it's a walking back from affect to an aesthetic category. And for this student, Julia, the doorstop represented cheeky because it produced an affect for her that was cheeky. So they reproduced through model making and drawing the objects at a different scale. Here's Julia Martinelli presenting the cheeky velvet doorstop. So they remade it out of different materials that they also thought were cheeky, or according to their own aesthetic category. This is the pompous pom-pom animal by Josh Melton. Here it is again, remade through pom-poms. And this is M.Arch's sexy nail perfume bottle, and remade. So this is just some of the earliest exercises from the class. The work was an attempt to develop the categories of framework for decision making and designing with an emphasis on analyzing meanings and associations of forms, materials, and symbols. it's an attempt to look at where human intersubjectivity intersects with the qualities of the thing world. And so all of these different minor aesthetic categories or uncommon senses working together are what I think is a potential way of like challenging some of the rarefied understandings in our architectural discourse, and this group, this recognition of the difference in taste and the potential design implications of those tastes is what I'm thinking of as like a solidarity of taste. The word solidarity originally derives from the Latin solidare, to make firm, to combine parts to form a strong whole. It's a unity while maintaining and recognizing difference. This unity in recognizing difference is something that I think has real implications for us, real consequences in our world. And we have a lot of gendered troubles, which we're attempting to grapple with in our Moving Toward Gender Equity in Architecture Symposium, which is co-organized by Lior Vysotsky and students at the school. Upon and behind the surfaces of architecture parlance, the public-private binary leaves us with its corresponding gendered split between the masculine exterior and the feminine interior. And despite progress in our understanding of gender expression and identification, the built environment and its reification and our reification of its value remain entangled in the public masculine and private feminine stereotype split metaphor, with its root extending to the turn of the century and early modern architects. And it shows how these aesthetic paradigms belie real structural barriers in our field that affects the way we work in the field, and if we feel like we can actually become architects. Some of these tropes we were attempting to grapple with in our symposium on gender inequality, of course, including masculine tropes in architecture. And that aesthetic paradigms and principles regulate exclusion and inclusion, have real political implications, in particular, contributing to structural barriers in the gendered environment. So here's a look at some of the participants. We had Grace Law, Shelby Doyle, Mabel O. Wilson, and Damon Leverett, and I moderated. Let's see. Having a, there we go. So this is just a look at some of the attendance and some of the questions we asked. That these questions were workshopped with students. The students were Haley Algo, Lauren Boyd, Lynn Quinn, Sydney Landers, and Michaela Garza. Just to give you a peek at some of these questions, I'll just put them on the screen here. Is architecture an inherently masculine profession? Does one need to be masculine in order to succeed in the profession? And what gender tropes must we overcome? Some of the responses to these questions: Shelby Doyle on identity, it's a matter of taking up space, being present and not apologizing for addressing structural issues. Mabel O. Wilson on power dynamics, it's a matter of, oh, I must have repeated that one. So Grace Law on gender tropes, we've got to actively think through and rethink these strange modifiers like woman architect and the necessity of modifiers in the field in general. So that was just one of the ways in which we were attempting to address some of these tropes in architecture and their implications for us. Just to go back for a second, to provide some context for the demographic state of architecture, the 2018 study by the SFAIA, Equity by Design, found that 46% of its respondents identified as female, 53% as male, and 1% as non-binary. And of those respondents, 80% were white and 85 to 90% were straight. So we continue to lack detailed statistics around individuals identifying as non-binary or gender non-conforming or even trans. We just don't have any data on it. Of course they exist. But looking at age, the demographics become significantly more female and more racially diverse the younger you look, suggesting that the future for the diverse leadership of our profession is possible only if we can address the structural challenges along the way. And I believe the ability to identify not only with others like oneself, but also one's allies directly affects the decision to pursue architecture in the first place, and once there, whether to stay in architecture. And as a gay man, I can speak to the weight of expectations around straight masculine performativity has personally affected me. And I believe that all of us need to address the state of masculinity within architecture and to locate positive models for what it might mean to be a man or a woman or non-binary, cis or otherwise, within architecture, and to establish new paradigms of what an architect can look like, act like, and design like. So, querying monumentality. I previously defined queer as non-normative logics, an organization of community, sexual identity, embodiment, and activity in space. So now I'll be showing you some of my design work. Let's see. So, mess and excess. So, messy. My work has been described as messy, and I've tried to think about what the implications of what that might mean. Messy is sort of a lack of organization. It's potentially producing a negative affect. And for me, when designing, I think that the work, one of the potential affects of messy, a lack of organization, a lack of detail, is first of all in direct opposition or counter to an idea of a rarefied organizational logic. And so one of the potential affects of what I think messiness could actually afford us is this idea of estrangement, where what on first blush may appear to be sort of organizing principles, messiness can actually help us slow down and potentially reapproach some of those normative understandings of how to live, how to produce, ways to be in the world. And estrangement for Svetlana Bohm is a slowing down and working against instrumental and goal-oriented temporality, which may allow for reflection and judgment. And so this idea of estrangement, I actually think, is quite closely related to Jack Halberstam's concept of queer time. And queer time for Halberstam is a temporality, a model of temporality that is counter to the temporal frames of bourgeois reproduction and family longevity, and this idea of property inheritance. So messiness may actually be a good thing. And so I'll just quickly go through some of my projects here, so we have some time at the end for questions. So this first project is Open Sheds from 2016. I produced this with Alex Spazier and Aaron Goldstein. This was a project that was commissioned for the Hayes Valley Artworks, which is a public nonprofit arts programming organization, and the site was essentially in between. It was set to become a condo development, but it was currently abandoned, and it was essentially an infill waste site with a lot of trash. And so first of all, what we were asked to produce was a wayfinding installation and also storage for some of their materials. So we produced a sign shed. Here's a look at the site. You can see on the right, we were design building this and laying out the panels. Here's a look at a view of it from the street, approaching it through the chain link fence. The sign reads open on each side of the inflatable roof. There's a letter, and there are 4 letters in open, so it's actually could be read as open when it's inflated, or it could be read as nope. And so this is showing the way we designed the ripstop and vinyl inflatable sign roof, and how it becomes twice its size. Here it is, unfolded elevations and unfolded interior elevations, plan and section. Here's a view of how it inflates. And so when it's open, they inflate the roof. Here's a section showing the blower installing it, and at night when there's an interior light. So here's a view towards the neighborhood in Hayes Valley, San Francisco. And for the past 6 years, I've been working as the co-founder and director of New Stars Design Group, where we do stage production work. And I've worked with lots of design partners on these projects throughout the years, and I'll get to the credits on that at the end. But Burger Boogaloo is a punk rock music festival that's hosted by John Waters in Oakland. And we do this set design, logo design, this is a billboard I designed for them a couple of years ago. We also do wayfinding and promotional material. This is something that's given to festival goers. And this is just a selection of some of our installations. We've produced more than 10 different installations over the years for them. This is the inflatable hand, a puffy door, that's me actually, that would allow the drummers to enter the stage. This is a power pyramid. Here's a look at all of this. Here's a presentation image that we gave this is a messy presentation image that we gave the client in order to sell him on those ideas that I just showed you. Here's a look at it fully installed, a view from the crowd. So that was the Fleshland stage. And this is the Big Mouth stage. So a slight variation. This is a view of Seth Bogart performing, and we had to integrate a projection screen this year, which was actually a big challenge for us. Here's a look at some messy and collage-y elevations for us. All of these projects are design build. We literally build them ourselves with our own hands and power tools. And so it's kind of scrappy, but it always comes together. Here's another view of it during the day. Here's a same view at night, the Big Mouth stage. This year was the legs and trolls. So this is the Gone Shrimpin' stage. The legs are 16-foot tall inflated ripstop. The backdrop is clear PVC. And the vinyl, the pink shell is vinyl, lumber, and plywood and polyfill. It's stuffed. So we always incorporate sort of pneumatic elements, like pneumatic meaning air flowing and filling things up. And we actually find that in terms of this being feasible as an installation that comes up in the course of several hours, and then has to be removed from the site, as the site is a public park in Oakland, Mosswood Park. All of these things need to be easily transportable and have a very short lifespan. but also be able to be kept for later use. So inflatables are something we tend to return to because you can make something very big out of very little material and air is free. So this is an elevation of that same proposal with Divine, one of my favorite drag queens for scale. Here's a look at us working in the warehouse. This was the one year we actually had a warehouse. We usually have to get scrappier and improvise in backyards and alleyways and driveways. So we have, here's a look at John Waters on the leg stage, and a look at the trolls that year. So every year we do 2 installations, and we're always a group of 3 or 4 people doing all of this ourselves. So it's always logistically challenging. So we, like I said, we try to work with inflatables, and on this was the main stage that year. We had giant trolls, and we tried to, something that's not really being captured in these static images is how things move. Inflatables are always moving due to the rumbling of the stage, the wind blowing, and also we also interact with them in different ways. So we devised different elements such as this hand stick to work with the inflatables during performances. And as you can see, they kind of shift and move with the wind, literally bowing their heads. And this is a look at an installation from last year we just completed. We're taking a different approach to wind. This time, because the site is open to the air and there's a strong directional wind during the day, instead of fighting the wind, we always try to work with the wind. And so this installation is really set around that principle. It's a series of pinwheels. So it's 25 feet wide by 20 feet tall, made of largely found elements or ready-made elements that we modify. It was inspired by this idea of going back to this idea of estrangement. Like, we were interested in how moire effects and op art and color, sort of color theory, produce estrangement effects. And so we went through various proposals. This was the final elevation color scheme for the proposal. And we're interested in how the simple juxtaposition of colors can create an illusion of a change in color. So for the effect of a gradient. And because we're only simply using a total of 4 major colors here to produce a gradient. And the effect of the illusion of a gradient and also the moire effect is really pronounced the further away you are from the installation. It's made of polycarbonate sheets, duct tape, artist tape, PVC pipes, PVC fittings, and paracord. Here's a view of it in motion. And this is a diagram just showing the logistics of installing this stacking order. When we install these modules, we had to take into account how they would overlap so that when they're spinning, they wouldn't actually hit each other. And we do all this. So this is one of those pinwheels unfolded. Before we folded it, it's made of duct tape, polycarbonate, and artist tape, and we devised assembly lines by hand to structure these. This is one of the prototypes, prototype installation. And this is the day of installation, just showing that order of stacking. And we prefabricated the cross modules with the pinwheels already attached. Here's a view of it straight on elevation from the back, a bit of a detail. And so here's a detail image of one of the pinwheel configurations. for us, it's the detail is kind of that there is no detail. It's very planned, but everything is very planned. But the effect of it is a bit messy. But because these things are actually viewed from far away, that detail is actually perfect. And all of these elements are, as you can see, the pinwheel is constructed out of ready-made objects that are modified. So these are Durex PVC pipes. Here's a view at night, and from afar you can start to really see how that gradient effect takes place. And for that, this is from the back. I'll leave you a view, leave you with the view between the porta potties. But I should give thanks to all of the collaborators I work with on these projects, and so you can see them here. In New Stars, this last year was Leah Dagan and Spencer Atlas, and before 2019, I was working with Tyler Beard and Megan Lowe. So thank you. I'll just have one final statement. So beyond positing a recuperation of the ugly, I'm interested in pursuing aesthetic expressions outside the beautiful ugly binary. Beautiful pairs with pleasure, while ugly with disgust, and beautiful and ugliness as aesthetic polarities propel us equally towards one outcome, the reinforced distinction between the self and the other. I'm interested in ways that we can engender alternate aesthetic expressions beyond the pale of these binaries, away from the othering principles of major aesthetic categories such as beautiful and ugly, toward the stimulation of minor aesthetic categories, to straddle the dividing line between pleasure and disgust, to hold both at bay to invite edgier goals. Aesthetics, design, and thinking that accommodate plurality of expression and identity and effective modalities. So thank you very much. And now I'm happy to take some questions. If you have questions, you can raise hand, or you could also type it in the chat. And I'll stop and share now and just go to my face. So I have chat. Okay. I'd be happy to take any questions at all, really. I know we're
Adam,
yeah.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
And I'm sure it might be one that's on many people's minds. First of all, thank you for a very, very wide-ranging talk. It went from the political dimensions to various threads of argument to your own work, and I think that's really fantastic. The question I have for you has to do with something you said about midway through, and maybe it was your own thinking, or maybe it was someone else's, that
Sure.
there is good bad taste and bad taste.
That was John Waters.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, that must mean that there's bad good taste and good taste. I'm just wondering what the how you handle that meta level, or should we say the next level? Like, how do you tell the difference between good quote unquote bad taste and bad quote unquote bad taste? Like, you know, once you toss the categories up, it only invites another round of categorization. Like, how do we know some other guy's bad taste is good bad taste?
I think that is like one of the driving questions for me. I don't have an answer to that question, and I'm actually not interested in necessarily the value judgments of good and bad. Those, I'm not interested in them as being necessarily helpful for us as designers to think about the nuances of the affects of different design approaches, or the different spatial.
Okay, but haven't you just substituted good and the words interesting and not interesting for good and bad? In other words, now the difference is it interesting or is it not interesting? right? That just is a stand-in for good and bad, because interesting is good and uninteresting is bad.
I disagree. I think that interesting does not actually have a moral value judgment to it. And I think that
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we could have a debate about that. I mean, I'm happy to talk more about what interesting
Yeah,
means,
sure.
but in terms of what I think might, I'm interested in not necessarily putting forward the fact that there is good bad taste, that there is one idea of what those things are, or that there's bad taste, or there's only good taste and there's only bad taste. What I'm interested in is trying to demystify and unpack what is actually behind statements like that, and trying to use different frameworks and different, I guess, what I'm talking about is being minor aesthetic categories that might help us to understand, like, all right, when you're saying something is good bad taste or bad taste, how might you better describe that thing? What are the ways?
I see that. Yeah. So
That's
it's
what
trying to find a broader vocabulary. So it doesn't always.
Hopefully a more
always fall-
appropriate vocabulary that doesn't result in moralizing judgments that leave a lot of people and a lot of cultural nuances in the dust, that allow for a more complex and nuanced way of designing for the built environment and understanding that built environment that it already exists.
Right. I hear you.
Okay. But yeah, I'm like, let's continue this conversation again at some point.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Happy to.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Well, I'd like to thank you all so much for your attention, and I realize that I didn't leave that much time at the end, so if you want to actually just talk to me, I'd be happy to talk to any of you about any of these things at any time. Please contact me if you want to talk. My email is adam.miller@austin.utexas.edu. So please feel free.
Adam, thank you very much. Leora, thank you very much.
Pioneer.
Thank you, Leora. Thank you, Michael. Thank you all.
All right.
Okay.
And there's stuff on the chat now. So
Oh,
that's from
let's
Alan
see.
Shearer, from Kelsey to everyone. Very good.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I guess I have 1 minute left. I'll respond to Carly. How did I get involved with creating the production as opposed to traditional architecture? I do both, actually. The set production is a seasonal project, and I got involved through just being in the music scene, and I met a bunch of individuals who work on the festivals, and I got involved with and became friends with one of the leaders of that music festival, and I was invited to participate in it, and it snowballed every single year and got bigger and bigger, and I just kept doing it. So yeah, I hope that answered your question, Carly. Okay, thank you all, and feel free to email me.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Okay, take care.